My name's Renata, and for most of my life, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. I did the work, stayed in the background, and told myself that being overlooked wasn't the same as being forgotten. But the truth is, silence has a weight to it. It stacks up year after year, until one day, it's not just heavy, it's suffocating. And sometimes, all it takes is a single moment, one you never saw coming, to make you finally ask, what do I owe to a family that never saw me? Stick around and listen to the full story. Then tell me, did I do the right thing? Was I brave, or just done? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd really love to know what you would have done if you were me. It was a Thursday morning in late September when I realized I was no longer invisible, but only because someone needed a villain. The bell above the door at June and Oak gave its usual soft chime when I walked in, but no one looked up. I liked that about this place. It was quiet without being empty, and full without demanding anything from me. The barista, a kind-eyed woman named Trish, slid me my usual cappuccino with a faint smile. I nodded back, found my corner seat by the window, and opened my laptop. I didn't come here to work today. I just needed to breathe. I needed to sit somewhere that didn't carry the smell of concrete dust and generational expectation. But as soon as I clicked into my browser, the headline greeted me like a slap. Ellery Materials holds emergency press conference amid financial collapse. My fingers hovered for a second. I didn't mean to watch it, but I did. There he was. Grant. My older brother, in his usual Navy suit, and that forced half-smile he used whenever he had no idea what the hell was going on. Behind him, the Ellery logo looked tired, faded, like it knew its time was up. He started with the usual. Supply chain issues, rising costs, labor shortages. Then his tone shifted, and my breath caught just a little. "We've seen tough years before," he said, voice steady. "But when key members of your leadership choose to walk away at critical moments, the foundation shakes." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I stared at the screen for a long moment after the video ended. The taste of the coffee had turned bitter. My palms were cold. I'd left that company 2 years ago. No announcement, no drama. Just a quiet resignation letter and a cleared-out desk. No one asked why. No one stopped me. And now, 2 years later, when everything was crumbling, not because I left, but because he stayed, they needed someone to blame. They needed a villain. And I was convenient. You see, I grew up knowing where I belonged, behind the curtain. I was good with numbers, so they gave me spreadsheets. I was precise with projections, so they let me double-check margins. But leadership, strategy, legacy, that wasn't for me. Not because I couldn't, but because I wasn't that. I can still hear Dad's voice like it happened yesterday. We were in his office, the one lined with hunting trophies he never actually hunted. He'd just finished telling me why my budget restructuring proposal would be too disruptive to Grant's vision. "Your brother understands business better," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like he was offering wisdom instead of a wound. "You're good, but you're not that." Not that. Not what? Not enough. I didn't ask. I nodded, packed up my laptop, and left the room. But I didn't forget. The truth is, I ran the numbers behind every expansion, every contract. I flagged the warehouse losses before they ballooned. I wrote the protocol that kept our audits clean for 5 consecutive years. But Grant had the Ellery name stitched into his tie, and the tone of voice Dad respected. So I stayed quiet. I kept the wheels turning from the background. Until one day, I stopped. I remember the day I walked out. It wasn't stormy or dramatic. The sun was shining. I dropped my badge in the bin near HR and didn't even say goodbye. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But the truth is, I was just tired of not being seen. And now, watching Grant speak like I was some deserter, some weak link who'd abandoned the ship, it ignited something in me I hadn't let surface in years. He hadn't changed. And maybe I hadn't either. Not fully. Not yet. The door at June and Oak opened again, but I didn't look up. Outside, leaves danced across the sidewalk in sudden gusts. Inside, I sat frozen, half in the present, half drowning in 1,000 little moments of being dismissed, overlooked, rewritten. That press conference wasn't about business. It was about ownership, image, blame. And it told me everything I needed to know. They thought I left quietly. But silence was never surrender. Not this time. 2 years ago, I stood in my office at Ellery Materials with a printed risk analysis in my hand and a lump the size of a fist in my throat. The air smelled like burnt coffee and old printer toner. My palms were sweating. I had run the numbers a dozen times, cross-checked, highlighted, footnoted. The projection was solid. If we didn't restructure our vendor contracts within the quarter, we'd bleed out millions over the next fiscal year. It was clear, mathematically clean. I waited outside my father's office, just like I had since I was 22 and fresh out of grad school. The door was cracked open. Inside, Grant was laughing at something, his voice full of ease, like he owned the floor, and the conversation too. When I stepped in, the laughter died quickly. My father looked up from his desk with that cool, unreadable gaze he used when he was already halfway to a decision. "I've got some updated projections," I said, trying to keep my tone professional, not defensive. I laid the document down, walked him through it. Short sentences, no jargon. I didn't even look at Grant. When I finished, he leaned back, hands folded across his chest. His sigh was heavier than it needed to be. "You've got talent, no doubt," he said. "But your kind of talent. It's not for the business world. My kind of talent." The phrase sat there, ugly and vague, too polite to be outright cruel, but sharp enough to draw blood. I didn't argue. I just nodded, picked up my report, and walked out. That was the last time I tried to steer the ship. I wasn't angry, not then. I was just tired. Tired of trying to be heard in a room that had already decided I was background noise. I didn't pack up right away. I still showed up for 2 more weeks. I cleared out backlog reports, answered every vendor email, finalized the quarterly filing. But my decision had already been made. No announcements, no drama, just a quiet resignation and a final signature. People say leaving is the hard part. It isn't. The hard part is that echo after you close the door, the one that sounds like your own voice, asking if maybe you should have stayed a little longer, tried a little harder, proved them wrong one more time. That echo haunted me until the day I met Mara Vinson. The first time I sat across from her, she didn't look at my resume. She barely glanced at my references. Instead, she folded her hands and asked me a single question. "Tell me one thing you know you're better at than anyone else in your family." It caught me off guard. Not, "What are your strengths?" or "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Just that. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Finally, I said, "Seeing what's coming before it hits." She nodded like she already knew. "Good, because that's what we need." That was my first day at Alder Ridge Capital, and it was the first time in years someone didn't ask me to step aside for someone louder, taller, or male. Within weeks, I was managing asset reviews, drafting acquisition strategies, and advising on turnaround plans for failing small businesses. I was finally doing the work, not waiting to be allowed. And 6 months later, the same vendor account I'd warned Ellery about? It defaulted. The exact scenario I'd mapped out, millions lost. I found out through public filings. No one from the company called. Not Dad, not Grant, not even Elaine from accounting, who used to bring me leftover muffins from her daughter's bake sales. No apology, no acknowledgement. Nothing. They didn't even need to say it. I already knew the rules. If a man messes up, it's the market. If a woman was right, it's just coincidence. I didn't tell Mara. I didn't need to. She could read it in my eyes the day the news broke. We were in a client meeting when I saw the update pop on my phone. I didn't flinch. I just kept talking, but my hand gripped the pen too tight. She noticed. Later, in her office, she offered me a drink. I said no. "You okay?" she asked. Yeah, I said. Just strange to be right and still feel like I lost. She didn't say anything, just let that hang in the air. Some wounds don't bleed, they bruise, and this one had been coloring me for years. Now, looking back, I understand something I didn't then. Sometimes the hardest part of leaving isn't the door you close, but the echo of your own silence after it. By the fall of the following year, I had settled into one of the lead analyst roles at Alder Ridge Capital. It felt strange how natural it had become, being trusted, being consulted, not second-guessed. After a lifetime of fighting to prove I belonged in rooms filled with men named Ellery, this place just asked, "What do you think?" and actually listened to the answer. I handled complex accounts now. Distressed businesses, generational companies circling the drain, small-town owners holding on by their fingernails. My job was part detective, part surgeon. Identify the infection, cut it out, and find a way to make the whole thing run again. Cleaner, leaner, smarter. It wasn't about glory, it was about clarity. And there was something quiet and deeply satisfying about solving problems when no one was rooting for you to fail. Then, on a gray Monday morning in early October, Mara slid a folder across my desk. It was thinner than most. "Small industrial supplier," she said, tapping the corner. "Family run, Midwest-based, long history, big local presence. Cash is bleeding out. Owner wants to exit but won't say it out loud." I opened the cover, half focused, until I saw the name at the top of the first page. Ellery Materials Supply Company. My throat tightened. I didn't speak right away, just kept flipping through the brief, slower now. The legal rep listed was unfamiliar, a new face, maybe a fire hire. But the financial data, it was unmistakable. This wasn't a business I needed to study. It was one I had once bled for. Overdue vendor payments, overstated earnings projections, a ballooning credit line, no cost control strategy in place. It was all familiar, and it was worse than I expected. "You can hand it off," Mara offered. Her voice was steady but softer than usual. "No questions asked." I looked up. "Number, I'll take it." She gave a small nod. No judgment, just understanding. Still, I requested to manage the deal through one of our shell entities. No visible links to Alder Ridge, and absolutely none to me. This couldn't be personal. Not on paper. It had to be clean. At first, I treated it like any other file. Historical data pulls, vendor interviews, third-party audit requests. But the deeper I went, the heavier each number felt. It wasn't just data, it was muscle memory. Every bad line item, every deferred maintenance decision, every inch of arrogance in the projections, it all spoke of Grant. And Dad. They had steered the ship like the name alone would keep it afloat. Grant had doubled down on markets we had flagged years ago. His forecasts weren't optimistic. They were delusional. A warehouse in Ohio had been shut down after a predictable compliance failure. The insurance payout had disappeared into a general expense ledger and was never allocated, and no one had raised a red flag. Then came the email. It was meant for a legal broker, one of the intermediaries, but it got forwarded to our team by accident. My name wasn't mentioned, but I was there, in implication. They say the buyer's being led by a woman. Word is she's some former paper pusher, probably has no clue what these machines even do. I let out a single dry laugh in my office. Not because it amused me, but because it was so predictable. Grant hadn't changed. Different quarter, same script. Even now, even in crisis, he couldn't fathom that someone like me might be the one writing the final chapter of our family's company. A week later, I found the crack that split everything open. Buried in the quarterly internal statements was an anomaly, an unlisted withdrawal from the Employee Benefits Fund. A small number on paper, but significant. And when I traced it back, it became clear. The funds had been used to cover the shortfall on a supply deal gone sideways. The contract had been overpromised and underdelivered. Grant had authorized the transfer personally. No board approval, no employee consent. just a quiet backdoor patch. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was potentially criminal. I sat with that number on my screen for over an hour, hands still on the keyboard but not typing, just staring, just breathing through the weight of what it meant. I could walk away, call a conflict of interest, recuse myself. It would be cleaner, safer, and no one would ever know what I had seen. But if I did that, if I looked the other way, then I was complicit in the thing that had driven me out in the first place. Silence. Not all silence is surrender. Sometimes it's just survival. But there's a version of silence that isn't about peace. It's about protecting people who don't deserve it, at the expense of the ones who do. And I'd lived that long enough. If doing the right thing meant becoming the villain in their story, was I ready to wear that name? Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just finally done pretending I didn't see the truth. Most nights that fall, I ended up back at June and Oak, like my body returned there on autopilot. Same table by the window, same worn notebook in my bag, same cappuccino too, though it always went cold before I remembered to finish it. The place hadn't changed, but everything else had. I didn't bring contracts anymore. I didn't review projections or forecast cash flows. What I brought with me every night was a different kind of ledger, a plain leather notebook filled with long, looping handwriting. Things I'd never said out loud. Not to Dad. Not to Grant. Not even to myself, really. I wrote about being 16, sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday nights, typing out invoices, while Dad watched football in the next room. I wrote about the time I overheard him on the phone with a client, saying, "Grant'll take over once he's ready," when I was already running payroll and balancing accounts. I wrote about the day I found out there was a formal succession plan. I wasn't on it. No conversation, no explanation, just a list. And silence where my name should have been. It didn't crush me the way it used to, but it still bruised. The deal was almost done. We'd finished all the financial modeling, confirmed the asset values, interviewed department heads. Legal was deep in the final paperwork, mostly archive review, board memos, internal decisions, legacy authorizations. It should have been straightforward. Until it wasn't. I was going through the last set of scanned documents one night in the office when I saw it. A capital reallocation memo from 3 years earlier. These weren't rare. They allowed for discretionary funding for strategic ventures. But the amount was large, the timing suspicious, and the final signature stopped me cold. It was mine. Except I never signed it. I remembered the project. Vaguely. It had been a flashy marketing investment, a gamble I had explicitly advised against. I'd even sent a memo outlining why it was unsound. But they moved forward anyway, and 6 months later it imploded. Lost hundreds of thousands. I thought they just ignored me. That was standard. But the moment I saw that fake signature, everything from that time snapped into focus. The coolness from Dad, the tension in meetings, the awkward silence from HR when I resigned. They thought I had approved it. Someone had forged my name, likely Grant. Maybe with Dad's blessing, maybe not. But either way, they'd let me carry the weight of a failure I never signed off on. I sat at my desk for a long time, just staring at the screen. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way people expect. What I felt was something colder, sharper, a kind of betrayal so subtle it almost passed for disappointment. Later that night, I found myself sitting across from Mara in her office. The lights were dimmed. Everyone else had gone home. She handed me a glass of water, no questions asked. I slid the document across the table. She read it once, calmly. "That's felony-level forgery," she said quietly. "You want to press charges?" "No," I replied. "I don't need a court case. I just need the truth in the room." She nodded slowly. "Understood." Then she sat back, watching me closely. "We can walk away from this," she said. "Cite a conflict of interest. Nobody would blame you. You've done more than your part." I knew what she was really offering, an exit, a clean, private way to leave it all behind. No headlines, no scandal, No ugly conversations with people who once called themselves family. And for a moment, I considered it. But I also knew this. If I walked now, I'd carry that silence with me for the rest of my life. I'd always be the one who almost changed things, the woman who nearly stood up, the girl who disappeared the minute it got complicated. I thought about the women I'd worked with that year, owners of laundromats, local manufacturers, single moms running bakeries from their garages, women who'd been told to be practical, to wait their turn, to stay in their lane. What if I stopped waiting? What if just once I said, no more? I looked up at Mara and said, steady as breath, we're moving forward. She didn't smile, but something softened in her expression. A flicker of something fierce and quiet, like respect. She just nodded. Then we'll move forward. Later that night, back at June and Oak, I opened my notebook to a blank page. I didn't overthink it. I just wrote one sentence, then closed the cover and let it sit. I wasn't planning to watch it. Really, I wasn't. That morning, I told myself I'd be too busy. I closed my office door, turned off Slack, silenced my phone. I even pulled a fresh case file off the stack, determined to drown in something impersonal. Manufacturing margins, maybe, or regional tax code adjustments. Anything but the live implosion of the family name I used to carry like armor. But at 10:59 a.m., my fingers betrayed me. At exactly 11 o'clock, the screen lit up with the familiar blue and gold of Ellery Materials, projected behind a podium that looked more like a prop than a platform. Grant stood at the mic, dressed in the same navy suit he wore to our father's retirement party. It hung a little looser on him now. Maybe he'd lost weight, or maybe it was just the pressure finally cutting into his frame. He was flanked by 2 lawyers and a PR rep who looked like she hadn't slept in days. The banner behind them was crinkled at the corners, like even the fabric was tired of pretending. Today marks the end of a legacy, Grant began, voice tight, clipped. Our family has served this community for 3 generations, but markets shift, and people shift too. My stomach turned. I knew exactly where this was going. There are times, he continued, pausing just long enough to sound deliberate, when key individuals prioritize personal ambition over the stability of something bigger than themselves, when loyalty gets replaced by opportunity. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. The implication hit like a whisper inside a church, soft but sacred enough to silence the room. It didn't need to be loud. It needed to land. And it did. My chest felt like it had a weight pressing down on it, one breath at a time. I sat frozen as the live stream ended, with a blurry press photo and the sound of reporters shouting questions that went unanswered. Then came the headlines. Insider claims Ellery's downfall tied to quiet exit of founding daughter. Betrayal or strategy? Who is the woman behind the buyout? Sister turned shark, a family divided. One of them ran a photo I hadn't seen in years. My college graduation picture. The one Dad never printed, never framed, never commented on. That's how I found out I'd been outed. Someone, maybe a bitter ex-employee, maybe a curious intern with too much time on their hands, had put the breadcrumbs together. My name in filings, ownership records, corporate shells. My face tucked away in digital corners I had long stopped checking. The dots were there. All it took was someone to connect them. And now the world knew. I stared at the screen, watching the wave roll in. Tweets, comments, emails from journalists, even a few texts from numbers I hadn't saved. Most of them said some version of the same thing. Why would she do it? Mara called a few hours later. Her voice was steady, like it always was in a storm. You don't have to say a word if you don't want to, she said. But you could also tell the truth, for once. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the dark reflection of my face in the black screen of my laptop. I didn't look like a traitor. I didn't look like a savior either. Just tired. Like a chapter had ended, but no one had warned me what came next. Truth. That word again. It used to mean facts, numbers, evidence. But lately, It felt messier than that. I hadn't burned bridges. I hadn't schemed. I hadn't hidden behind legalese or back channels. I'd read the numbers. I'd called out what I saw. I took the steps no one else wanted to take. Not because I craved the power, but because I couldn't keep pretending that the damage wasn't real. But to them, I was the backstabber, the ambitious daughter, the girl who was supposed to stay in the background, nod, support, disappear. I thought about every meeting where Grant cut me off mid-sentence, every moment Dad passed him the credit for work I had done, every birthday dinner where I was asked about dating, but never about my career. Every time I swallowed my words, because I was tired of being called difficult. And now, even in collapse, even in public disgrace, they were still speaking over me. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't the girl sitting outside Dad's office with a folder and hope in her hands. I was a woman who knew what she was doing. I had the files, the receipts, the proof. And more than anything, I had something they never gave me: a voice. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street buzzed with life. Traffic rolling by, people bundled in coats, kids tugging backpacks twice their size. No one knew what had just happened inside me, but something had shifted. For years, they spoke over me. This time, I would speak for myself. The boardroom at Ellery Materials felt smaller than I remembered, not because the room had changed, but because I had. The wood-paneled walls were still the same dull walnut veneer that tried to look more expensive than it was. The blinds hung crooked, dust collecting in the corners, and the faint scent of old dry erase markers still lingered in the air, like stale arguments no one ever really won. But now, I wasn't the junior staffer standing by the door, waiting to be invited to speak. I was here with authority: legal, financial, emotional. I wasn't Renata the daughter, or the little sister, or the woman whose emails went unread while Grant presented my work as his. I was the principal representative of Ridgewell Holdings, the majority stakeholder of Ellery Materials, and I had come to end the story they refused to close. When I entered, the room fell quiet. Grant was mid-pitch, laser pointer in one hand, a stack of printed slides in the other. The screen behind him showed a mess of red lines and euphemisms: quarterly softness, unforeseen supplier setbacks, transition headwinds. Around the table sat 8 board members, a mix of old-school loyalists and new hires brought in to help modernize the brand, whatever that meant. Every face turned to me. No one said a word. I walked slowly, deliberately, heels tapping the floor with the kind of calm that gets mistaken for intimidation. I pulled out a chair at the far end of the table, once Dad's seat, now vacant, and took my place. I didn't need to say who I was. My name had been on the acquisition paperwork for months. Grant's voice cracked just slightly as he tried to recover. "So," he said, clearing his throat, "this was your plan all along?" His tone was half accusation, half desperation. The kind you use when you already know the answer, but ask anyway, just to delay hearing it. I met his eyes. "If by plan you mean cleaning up the mess you made, then yes." He forced a short laugh, too sharp to be real. "You think this makes you look noble?" "No," I said, calm but firm. "I'm not here to look like anything. I'm here to fix what you broke." I opened the folder I brought with me and slid a packet down the table. It landed just in front of him. "Page 7, I said. "Employee Benefit Fund, Q2 last year. The withdrawal history, the reallocation, none of it properly reported. All of it traced back to your sign-off." He didn't even reach for it. He just stared at the closed folder like it might burn him. I continued, voice steady. 42 employees laid off without severance, many of them with over a decade of service. No warning, no compensation, just cutting costs, right? I scanned the room. "Our firm will be issuing retroactive severance packages, effective immediately." Mr. Hanover, a longtime board member and staunch Grant loyalist, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He once told me, half joking, that I made too much eye contact for a woman. He wasn't laughing now. "This is aggressive," he muttered. I turned to him without blinking. This is overdue." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of what I brought into that room wasn't volume, it was truth. And truth, when you finally speak it after years of swallowing it down, doesn't need to shout. Grant slowly sat down. He didn't argue. Not because he agreed, but because for the first time, he realized no one in the room could protect him. I looked back at the board. "As of today," I said, "Mr. Grant Ellery will remain an employee in name only. All executive decision-making power is suspended, pending external audit and legal review." Pens scratched against paper. Some exchanged glances. No one objected. "I'm not here to destroy Ellery Materials," I added, voice low. "I'm here to make sure no one else does." There was a pause. One of the newer members, a woman I'd never met, finally asked, "So what's next?" I leaned back slightly, taking a breath that filled every inch of my ribcage. "We restructure. We rebuild. We remember that a company isn't its last name or its zip code. It's the people who show up every day and hold it together when leadership doesn't." I stood, gathering my notes, but left the folder in front of Grant untouched. I didn't need to slam it for emphasis. It was heavy enough. Before leaving, I looked at him one last time. His posture was slouched, his eyes hollow. He looked like someone who just realized the story he thought was about him. Wasn't. He whispered something, maybe my name, maybe not. I didn't stop to hear it. At the door, I turned back. Not for him, but for everyone else still watching. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's repair. And that's something you never cared to learn." Then I walked out. And this time, no one followed me. The old warehouse smelled the same, like motor oil soaked into concrete and years of labor baked into the walls. Nothing had changed in the air, but everything had changed in meaning. Sunlight poured through the broken slats of high windows, casting sharp diagonal beams onto the dusty floor. Folding chairs lined the open space in uneven rows. No banners, no podium, just a single mic, standing like a question in the middle of it all. They came anyway. Dozens of them. Men in steel-toed boots and denim jackets. Women in worn cardigans and calloused hands. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Some I'd never seen at all, but all of them carried the same look. The quiet weight of people who had been discarded and showed up anyway. They were the ones who'd been left behind when Grant pulled the plug. No farewell, no thanks, just an email. Some didn't even get that. I walked to the mic, past the first row where someone had placed a coffee thermos on the floor beside their foot. The cord dragged slightly behind me. I wrapped my fingers around the base of the mic, cool and metallic. My voice didn't tremble. "Most of you don't know me," I said, "and that's not your fault. That's on me." The crowd stilled. For a long time, I believed it didn't matter who did the work, just that it got done. I told myself I was just a support role. I told myself it didn't matter if someone else took the credit, as long as the company kept running. A few people nodded. One man crossed his arms and looked down at his boots. But I was wrong. I let the words settle. It does matter. It matters who's in the room, who gets to speak, who gets to be seen, and it matters when you're treated like you're disposable. A soft shift of weight through the rows. Someone coughed. "I'm not here to rewrite history. I'm here to make sure it doesn't repeat." I didn't give a speech. I didn't sell them on a vision or promise more than I could control. The documents they would receive by the end of the week would speak louder than any words. Back pay offers, transparency reports, reinstatement options. This wasn't about saving Ellery Materials. It was about giving the people who'd been stepped over a reason to show up again. When I stepped down from the mic, no one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. A few came forward, shook my hand. One woman handed me a folded piece of paper with a list of names. "The rest of us," she whispered. Some just made eye contact and nodded, and that meant the most. Then, like a shadow from another life, I saw him. Grant stood near the back wall, partly in light, partly in shade. His coat was buttoned wrong. His eyes looked like he hadn't slept. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Can we talk?" he asked. "We're talking." He hesitated, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying out different versions of himself before speaking. "I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I said. Quiet. Flat. He flinched but didn't retreat. "We're blood," he tried. "You can't just leave me out." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Blood doesn't give you access. Behavior does." That hit harder than I expected. He blinked once, twice, then looked down and stepped back. No apology, no grand scene, just a man slowly realizing he didn't hold the last word anymore. He turned and walked away. No drama, just absence. Mara arrived not long after. She carried a worn leather tote and a folder tucked under her arm. We stood side by side in silence, watching the last few workers trickle out into the lot. "It's yours," I said, handing her a slim envelope. "I signed the transition. You take over Monday." She studied me for a moment, not out of doubt, just clarity. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm done here," I said. "I came back to finish something, not to stay." She didn't offer a hug. Neither did I. We weren't built for ceremony, but in the space between us, there was a kind of stillness I'd never had with my own family. One rooted in choice, not obligation. As I stepped outside, the wind slapped hard against my coat. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel like I'd won. I didn't feel like a hero. But I didn't feel small anymore. I felt free. And that was enough. I went back to June and Oak the following morning. It wasn't planned. I just found myself walking that direction, like my body remembered the way, even when my mind hadn't made the decision yet. Same corner seat, same soft hum of conversation and clinking spoons. Trish handed me my cappuccino without a word, just a nod and a small smile, like she could tell something had shifted. She was right. I pulled out my notebook and stared at the last page I'd written. The ink had smudged a little near the bottom, probably from the steam of the cup or the press of my hand. But the line still read clear. Family may be blood, but silence too is inherited. And I was done passing it down. I didn't write anything new for a while. I just sat with it, letting it settle, letting it echo. The messages had started coming in already. Some curious, some accusatory, a few quietly supportive. One from a former warehouse manager just said, "Thank you. That's all." Another was from my aunt, who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, asking if I'd consider talking to the family over Thanksgiving. I didn't respond. Let them sit in the quiet for once. My laptop buzzed. A final legal email confirming Mara's official appointment as interim CEO. Everything was signed, sealed, handed over. The company was no longer mine to protect or repair. And that was the point. Grant hadn't called. Neither had Dad. I doubted they would. Maybe they were still trying to understand how things had gotten to this point. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just angry that the rules they had written were no longer mine to follow. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. A few months earlier, I might have hoped for some big reckoning, some moment where they'd realize how wrong they'd been. But I'd stopped needing that. What I needed now was quieter, simpler, and entirely mine. Mara had given me a parting gift yesterday, a small box wrapped in recycled brown paper. Inside was a brass key and a note that read, "This doesn't unlock anything but choice. Use it how you want." I didn't ask her what it meant. I didn't need to. It was the key to a new office space, barely furnished, a little dusty, but full of possibility. A place to start something else, something built on transparency and fairness, not family name or guilt. I might start a fund for women-led businesses. I might write that book I always joked about. I might do nothing for a while, just breathe. All of those things felt equally valid now. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under anyone's shadow, not even my own. I sipped my coffee and looked out the window. It was late November, and the sky had that pale gray tint that hinted snow was coming. People rushed by in coats and scarves, holding grocery bags, barking into phones, bundled up against the cold. I used to think healing would feel like closure, like an ending. It didn't. It felt like space, like room to move, room to choose. I packed up my notebook, stood, and pushed in my chair. My legs were steady. My hands weren't trembling. My voice, if I'd needed to speak, would not have shaken. As I stepped outside into the crisp air, the wind met me head on. I didn't brace against it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And that was enough. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the quiet ones, inside homes, inside families, and inside ourselves. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was about remembering your own worth when others forget it, about choosing peace, not silence. And maybe you felt something like that too, the slow ache of being overlooked and the courage it takes to finally speak. If any part of this story found its way to your heart, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. Until then, take care of your voice. It matters more than you think.